Hello again, .NET developers. In this video, I will show you how to install and set up TeamCity to do continuous integration for your projects. If you aren't familiar with continuous integration, it's a technique to help you improve the quality of your programs. Every time you make a change to your project and check it into your source code repository, your continuous integration tool pulls down the latest version of your source code, builds the whole project, lets you know if it found any errors, and if you have any unit tests, it will run the unit test and let you know if any of those have any errors. This is great because it will let you know if there's a problem within 5 or 10 minutes instead of you finding out a few days or a few weeks after you made the change. By the way, if you aren't familiar with source control or with unit test, I have a couple of videos that I'll include links to in the description below that show you how to do those for your C# projects. To install TeamCity, open up your browser and go to jetbrains.com/TeamCity. If you aren't familiar with JetBrains, it's the company that also puts out ReSharper and some other nice development tools. We'll do the free download, which is good if you're going to have up to 20 projects. And we'll do Windows and select the download. Notice that it's 640 megabytes, so this may take a while. The download is finished, so I'll close the browser and go to my download directory. For this installation, I'm going to install TeamCity on the same computer that I'm doing my development. For a larger company, you would probably have a separate build server where you install TeamCity and it sits there and watches all of your programs. But for developing at home, you can usually install it on your same computer as Visual Studio. Just double click on the installer. And it's a pretty simple install. Agree to the license agreement, choose your installation directory. Notice that it's going to take about 840 megabytes of space on your disk. For your components, select the Windows service for the server and for the build agent. The server is what's going to keep track of whether your build was successful or not, and the build agent is kind of like another little copy of Visual Studio that actually compiles your program. So as long as these four are checked, you're okay. After a minute, the main part of the installation is done, and now we have to do the configuration. The installer is asking what port we should use for the TeamCity server. If you aren't familiar with ports, think of it kind of like a phone number for a program. If one program wants to talk to another program, it can use a port to do that. That's one method. And this is the port number you would use for TeamCity. The only problem is 80 is also used by things like IIS or Apache, which are some web server programs. And if you ever want to develop an ASP.NET or a PHP web app, they're probably going to be looking at port 80 for their default. So we're going to pick a different one to use. Generally, the ports above 9000 are pretty safe to use, and I'm going to choose 9191. Then click Next. Now we have our build agent properties. This is mostly just the configuration information that we've entered before. And if you notice, the server URL is localhost, our machine, :9191, the port number TeamCity server is going to listen on. We'll save this. Click OK. Now it asks for the accounts to run the server and the agent under. I normally run them under a system account. I have my own development machine, so I don't really have too many security worries here. If you were on a network, you might want to run it under a user account. And select system account for the agent. And now I'm going to start both of these. It took a few seconds for the services to get started, and now we'll actually take a look at the TeamCity program. So I'll have this checked, open the TeamCity web UI. So when I clicked on Finish, it opened my browser and went to localhost :9191. And now I've got the TeamCity first start page. It asks for the data directory. I'm going to use a default directory and click proceed. It asks for what database connection you want to use. You could use Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server. I'm just going to go with the internal. That's the easiest. Now we'll take a minute to set up the initial components. And we get to the license agreement. Just accept it. And I'm not going to send the anonymous usage statistics, so I'll uncheck that and continue. And it asks you to create an administrator account. I'll create the account. Then it takes me to some more setup information. You can enter your full name here, your email address if you want to have TeamCity send you email notifications. And I'm also going to install the Windows Tray Notifier here. So this way I'll have a little app down here in the system tray to give me alerts and give me messages when a build starts, when it ends, if there's errors, if it's successful. Just click on the download. This is a nice small program. Save it. And run the Tray Notifier installer. Accept the terms. And go ahead and launch that. So now I've got this little circle down here, which is my TeamCity Tray Notifier. I'll click on it to log in. Give it the URL, which was http://localhost:9191. And my username and password. And now it's set up. Right now I'm not watching any builds because I haven't added any to TeamCity. Our next step is to add one of our projects here and have TeamCity start watching it. Before we create the build, I want to configure the notification service so that it runs every time I start up my computer. So go to your system tray and look for the TeamCity icon. It should be a gray circle with a question mark. Right click on it and select Run on Startup. So now every time the computer starts up, this service will run. Now we'll create a TeamCity build to watch a project I have called Unit Test Demo. Open up your browser to localhost:9191 or whatever port you used. Click on the Projects link in the upper left and click on the Create New Project button. If your solution is part of a group of solutions that work together, you might want to have a parent project, but for this it's a standalone solution, so we'll use the root project. Now we give the build a name. I'm going to call it Unit Test Demo and create that. The next step is to create the build configuration, how TeamCity will build your project. So we click on the Create Build Configuration button, and I'm going to name this Code Check-in because I want this to run every time I check code into the source code repository. Create that. The next step is to tell TeamCity where the source code is located. We tell it which type of version control software we're using. TeamCity can automatically connect to several different version control systems. I'm using SubVersion, so I'll select that. For the version control root name, this is just the name of the project, Unit Test Demo. And now it wants the URL for my SubVersion repository. If you're using Tortoise SVN, one way you can find that is through the repo browser. So you would go to the directory where your project is located, right click on it, select Tortoise SVN repo browser, and here's the URL. I'm going to copy that and paste it into the URL for TeamCity. If you're using a username and password for your version control, this is where you would enter that. I'm not using that. Once you've got that configured, click on Test Connection to make sure TeamCity can connect to your source code repository. And you should hopefully see a green connection successful. So now I'll create the build configuration. The next thing we need to do is create the build steps. Over in the left-hand menu, click on Build Steps. This is everything you want TeamCity to do when it builds your project. We're going to add the build step of pulling down the latest source code and building the project. The first thing we do is select the type of runner. There are lots of different tools you can use here for different purposes. For this, I'm going to select Visual Studio Solution because I want TeamCity to just use the Visual Studio Solution file to build it. If you use a tool like Ant or NAnt to build your solutions, TeamCity automatically understands those. Also MS Build. And there's some other tools you can use here for code quality, like FXCop, Duplicate Finder, Visual Studio Test, and Unit Test. But we're going to do the simplest one right now and just build the solution. For the step name, I'm just going to call this Build Solution. Now it asks for the path to the solution file. I can type it in, or I can click over here on the tree view icon and start browsing through my SubVersion repository. But what I see right here is my solution file right at the top. Next, you select the version of Visual Studio that you built your project for. Mine's Visual Studio 2015. For the target, your options are build, rebuild, clean, or publish. I'm going to choose clean, so TeamCity will completely delete the old files that it has in its working directory, pull down the new ones, and build off of that. That's usually the safest, just in case you have some old files sitting out there and you want to be sure that TeamCity builds with the correct recent set of files. For the configuration, you can do debug or release. I normally do release just so I can see what it would be like once I send the project to production. Save that. If we wanted to, we could add more build steps here. Some common ones might be running your unit test, running some other code quality tools, but for this video I'm just going to keep it simple and we'll do just the build. Now we need to tell TeamCity what's going to trigger the build. Over on the left-hand menu, click on the triggers link and add a new trigger. Then select VCS trigger. This is when something happens in your version control system that's going to trigger a build. For us, it's going to be checking in a change. You can configure the trigger here so that it builds on each check-in, which is what I want. So I check that box. You could set it so that it has a quiet period. So if you have a lot of people making changes, you might want to say, wait until nobody's checked something in for 5 minutes, then build. Save this, and now we can see if the build configuration worked. Click on the projects link in the upper left corner, and we see our unit test demo project with our code check-in build. And over on the right hand side, we see the run. Click the run button. And we see that it pulled down the code and successfully built it. This is our first build, so it's number 1. Now let's see how this would work if we set up the notifications and actually checked in a change. So we'll go down to the system tray, right click on the TeamCity icon, and say configure watched builds. These are the builds that we want to receive a notification for. This is the Windows tray notifier, and we'll click add new rule. I want to watch builds affected by my changes. We could also click on builds for the selected project and choose the build that we want to watch. Over on the right hand side, we choose which type of notifications we want to receive. I want to know if the build fails, if it succeeds, if it starts, if it fails to start, and if the build is probably hung, if it's stuck. Save those settings. Now if we go back to our system tray and left click on TeamCity, we see our unit test demo is down here with our success. Let's close that, go to our project, and make a change. I'm just going to add in a comment. Save that. And then I'm going to commit this to the source code repository. If we go to our TeamCity page, we see that there's a pending build. We receive our notifications. And we notice that it's built, and we are on build number 2 that's successful. We can click on the success notification. We see some information about our build. We can click on changes here. See what files were changed. And we can even view the change details. There's the comment we added. If we click on the build name, we can see our history of builds, whether they were successful or not, how long they took, what files got changed in each build. So now we're set up with TeamCity doing our continuous integration. Every time we check in a change to our source control, within a minute or so, TeamCity will detect it, do another build, and let us know whether the build was successful or not. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment below and I'll try to answer it as soon as possible.